Before we get started, I have a quick favor. I've been self-funding the Finding Genius podcast for 5 years now. I've done over 3,000 episodes. And as you can see on YouTube, we're up over 1 million views on the channel, which is fantastic. The next thing I really want to push on is to get up to 10,000 subscribers. Because once we do, we'll be able to put a donate button and we'll be able to solicit donations to help keep the podcast running and to also get the Finding Genius Foundation moving along. We have a big project studying anxiety, depression, and PTSD and working on a product to help people overcome these problems because I've seen them explode recently after the last 2 years of the whole virus situation. So if you would, please subscribe to the podcast. That would help us tremendously. Give us a thumbs up and check in the description for Buy Me a Coffee. It's about $5. If you could buy me a coffee, I'd really appreciate it. It would help keep the channel going, and I love coffee. Thank you.
Forget frequently asked questions.
Common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
go above and beyond.
They become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
with Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius Podcast. My guest today is Martin Reeves. He's a managing director and senior partner, chairman of the BCG Henderson Institute, BCG meaning Boston Consulting Group. He's the author of Like, the Button That Changed the World. So we're going to talk about his work with the BCG think tank and his new book. So welcome. Thanks for coming, Martin.
Thanks a lot, Rich. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, if you would, just tell me a bit about your background, how you got to work with BCG and then what led to the creation of this book.
Sure. So I used to be a biologist, and I guess I'm a generalist. I'm interested in all sorts of things. And so I settled in the consulting profession because you see a great variety of problems. And for many years now, I've been running the research part of BCG. And so I write my research and basically on the ideas that business will need in the future, the upcoming sort of ideas and challenges. And this particular book is a little different. It's a book about it's a micro history of the like button, and it's not really a traditional business book. It's more of a narrative. And the reason I wrote it is I accidentally bumped into one of the people that might have invented the like button, and that triggered a 3-year detective story to figure out who invented the like button. And so that's how I arrived at the book.
Okay. Yeah, what's some of the background of the like button? Who was the creator of it? What was the thinking at the time?
Well, so my co-author is a guy called Bob Goodson. He's a Silicon Valley CEO and a former, actually, a medieval literature scholar and at Oxford. And he's a bit of an avid hoarder. I'm sure he wouldn't mind me saying that. And so he keeps all of his, receipts and tickets and papers and so on over the years. And he was moving. So we were talking about this over coffee, didn't know each other very well. I said, well, you must be stumbling across all sorts of interesting stuff then, Bob. And he said, yeah. And he pulled out a notebook, and in it was a sketch of the like button. And the date on the sketch was obviously several years before Facebook introduced it. And I said, Bob, are you telling me you invented the like button? And he said, no, of course not. Well, maybe. And that was the start of the conversation. So we dug into this and, we don't know who invented the like button because, of course, it's a gesture that has been used with many meanings over hundreds of thousands of years. And we have many progenitors. We have the TiVo control. If you remember your TiVo control, it had a like button icon on it. That was like a physical icon. We had early like voting sites. I'm not sure if you remember the site Hot or Not, where you voted whether
Oh, yeah, am I hot or not? Yeah.
Right, you remember that one. Well, that was a sort of an early voting. And you had the sketch that Bob made for Yelp. He was one of the first employees of Yelp. And their problem was that they needed to attract restaurant reviews, and they couldn't afford to pay for them. And so they needed to recognize and reward the people that in a review. So that's why they came up with the like button. It turns out there's a whole cluster of people that were facing similar challenges at the same time. And we identify 10 or 15 sites in the book that invented some aspect of the like button. And the really interesting thing about talking to all of these inventors of the progenitors of the like button is they were actually not aware that they were doing anything special when they designed the like button, because they were dealing with just that day's tactical challenge. So for Bob, it happened to be, how do I encourage more restaurant reviews? For the founder of Hot or Not, it happened to be, how do I aggregate visually in some sort of voting mechanism? And then, of course, it later emerged that the like button was the whole key to the monetization mechanism of social media. But that came much later, almost like an unintended benefit.
Well, how could they not know who created it? I mean, I thought it would have been created with inside Facebook, and the first one that...
No, absolutely not. In fact, Facebook opposed the introduction of the like button for several years. I mean, it was already... We can document that it's already up and running with others. And then actually, Mr. Zuckerberg actually opposed the introduction of a like button for about 2 years, although the team there continued to work on it and they employed it and it caught on and it turned out to be a great monetization mechanism. Because, of course, the bigger problem that turned out to be solvable using this button is the old advertising equation. And people have always said about advertising that only half of my advertising makes any difference. I just don't know which half. And this gave you the feedback signals that said, I like that advertisement. I like that product. I like that company. And it did so very cheaply and in real time. And that was a revolution in the advertising industry.
Well, again, so how did this first come on your radar?
Well, there's a conversation with Bob. And then, so I had a half-hour get-to-know-you meeting with Bob, my co-author, one of the progenitors of the like button. And we actually spent a whole day. I spent a whole day digging into, well, who invented this thing then? And I was, I'd done a lot of work in innovations, so I was quite familiar with the ideas of an academic called Brian Arthur, who has written a book about just how serendipitous innovation is. We often tell hero stories about, a far-sighted individual that in an act of genius created something new in an afternoon or something, but it almost never happens that way. It's always, the process is always social. In other words, many people involved. Often you're trying to do something else. It's a serendipitous benefit of trying to do something else. Often there are many forgotten Einsteins, many people that contributed that are not remembered. The monetizer, the people we attribute the invention to, is often not the person. And so we started to dig into that. And as we dug into it, we bumped into other interesting questions, which sort of spun out from the main question. So, of course, the next question was, well, how does innovation really work then? And the next question was, right, but this could have been a smiley icon. It could have been a gold star. Why the thumb? And then that naturally led on to some things about human language, gestural language, brain science. Why do we like to like? And is being liked the same thing as liking? And what do we know about the brain science of that? And then that bumped into this sort of phenomenon of business disruption, which is, well, how did that blow up the advertising industry? Because this, if you want to rewind history, this could have been an absolutely fantastic technical idea, but there's no reason why it should have started an entire industry, the social media industry, or have disrupted the advertising and marketing industry. And
did it start it or just augmented? Now you're able to like them, dislike them, wherever it's YouTube or wherever,
Well, exactly. So I think it would be an exaggeration to say, of course, the entire invention of social media hinges on the like button. But on the other hand, it did play an incredibly crucial role because, like a lot of tech businesses, it actually started without a clear monetization mechanism. And that could have gone all sorts of ways, right? It could have been that the monetization model turned out to be charging users of these free social and email services. But it turned out that the killer proposition was actually selling to advertisers that the advertising would be more effective and more informed with the use of digital marketing and the like button. And the like button played an absolutely crucial role there because if you remember, not so long ago, actually, 20 years ago before the digital revolution, if you remember how advertisers got feedback, essentially they either didn't get feedback or they get feedback periodically every 6 months or something from an expensive survey, or they got a signal from a set-top box on a TV that didn't say that anyone liked anything. It simply said that the TV was on or that particular channel was on. So this was really a revolution, but it was not a planned revolution. It was a serendipitous outcome of people trying to do something else. But I'd say a fairly pivotal role in the disruption of marketing and advertising and the rise of the social media industry.
Well, I mean, it gives social proof. If you see something that has, 10,000 likes and, if you can't see the dislikes or anything, it monetizes itself on the back end. Like, were they considering charging people to like something in the beginning?
No, I don't think. I think like a lot of businesses, you start with a good functional idea. You've got a cool, you've got a site like Hot or Not or whatever, and it takes off, and then you have to make money. You have to find the scaling and the monetization mechanism, and the like button was crucial to that. The like button turned out to have some really clever properties, but they were not really designed. They were bumped in. So one clever property is that the word like is actually very ambiguous, right? Because it means homophily, which is this word the scientists use for I am like you, I'm similar to you, but also preference. I like your content or I like you. So that's very interesting because that gives you the possibility of not only liking content or a product, but also affiliating with somebody. So that's where we get the realization of the social graph. And then another very interesting function of the like button is it's probably the lowest effort, lowest friction form of content, because if you're running a social media business, the last thing you want is your feeds full with, extremely impoverished responses. People just tweeted thanks or okay. It's not going to make a very interesting feed. But if you can compress all of that into a like, it sort of cleans up the low impact content. It's a sort of voting mechanism. Do you like this? Do you not like this? It creates the social graph and the content graph. What content you like? Who do you like? It's instantaneous. It's cost free. And the other clever thing is maybe some technology veterans in your audience will remember a book that was very popular among designers at the time called Don't Make Me Think. And the idea was that innovation should not look special and complicated. It should look low friction. It should piggyback on ideas that already exist because those are the ideas that scale cost free. And of course, we all knew, because it's a cultural icon in the US and in other parts of the world, we all know what the like button meant. We didn't need a manual to figure out how to use the like button.
Before we continue, I've been personally funding the Finding Genius podcast for 4.5 years now, which has led to 2,700 plus interviews of clinicians, researchers, scientists, CEOs, and other amazing people who are working to advance science and improve our lives and our world. Even though this podcast gets 100,000 plus downloads a month, we need your help to reach hundreds of thousands more worldwide. Please visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click on Support Us. We have 3 levels of membership from $10 to $49 a month, including perks such as the ability to see ahead in our interview calendar and ask questions of upcoming guests, transcripts of podcasts you're interested in, the ability to request specific topics or guests, and more. Visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click Support Us today. Now back to the show.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious, right? Yeah.
Obvious in retrospect, but, talking to the people that were working on this at the time, they were trying to solve the daily tactical challenges, and they bumped into this bigger sort of, industry upturning, this more momentous use of the like button, which is now almost like a standard, right? You try and find a website that doesn't have something like a like button. It's hard. It's not just
emojis now too to dimensionalize your feelings, but yeah.
Well, that was interestingly, the version of the like button that my co-author drew was a single thumbs up symbol. The one that Yelp adopted was not that, but a multifunctional like button where you could find something funny, cool, etc. And so the world sort of standardized on the like button for a while, but then recently we've actually seen the proliferation of the multifunctional like button. So if you go on sites like LinkedIn nowadays, you'll see not just one possibility, a thumbs up, but you'll see a possibility of many emotional responses.
Is there any part of the like button or process that's patented that people have to, pay a royalty on?
No, actually. And
weird. You would have think that people would have raced to do that, and then maybe it was struck down because it was already in use, or?
Well, I think it was for a couple of reasons. So we are used to thinking about inventions as, the property of one inventor or one company and being restricted by patent. Often invention is social. It involves many existing ideas, and then we've detailed a number of technologies in the book. For instance, recapture technology, the way you copy some letters or you say where the bus is or whatever in a little picture to distinguish yourself from an algorithm. Yeah, that was invented multiply at the same time by different parties. Going back to the famous story about the heroic invention of the miner's safety lamp by Sir Humphrey Davy that prevented sort of catastrophic mine explosions in the Industrial Revolution. Turns out that wasn't just Humphrey Davy. There were at least 2 other contenders. And this, I think, is partly a problem that, number one, multiple people were facing the same problem at the same time. And that problem was, how do you get feedback on these new web tools? And at the time, remember, it was dial-up internet without triggering a page refresh. So you had to do it in the browser. You had to do it in JavaScript. And that was a problem that every company at the time was facing. So not surprising, people came up with solutions. Second reason is the particular culture of Silicon Valley. So when we talked to the progenitors about how did you hear about this, how do you communicate, they pointed out things like Squid Labs and other meetups where people just shared across companies. There was a real sort of sharing community across Silicon Valley. And then the other thing was the like button for all of the progenitors we talked to. It was not a big thing. It was a solution to a daily tactical challenge, and later converged on this sort of a big proposition that we may reasonably say is obvious in retrospect, but was not at all obvious at the time. Which is why, going back to the origin of the book, when I said to Bob, so are you telling me you invented the like button? He said, no, of course not. Well, maybe. He didn't know because that day that he did the like button sketch was not a particularly special day. It was just, the tactical challenge of the day. And the next day there was another one. So I think it tells us something about the nature of invention.
Yeah, there's co-invention. I know that happens with a lot of things. I've heard about that. Is that what you think this phenomena is?
Yes, absolutely. So certainly in the case of the like button that we look at in great detail, I mean, the book's entirely about the evolution, the invention, and the consequences of the like button. It's absolutely clearly a social, a parallel activity. But actually, we look at a whole bunch of other inventions, and it was true of those too. And interestingly, just after we completed the book, there was a paper in Nature that actually showed that I think it was something like 70% of scientific papers actually are about something that wasn't anticipated, a result that wasn't anticipated in the initial grant proposal that funded the paper. So it turns out that science and invention is highly social, highly serendipitous, often without foresight. You're trying to do one thing and something else happened, often with delay. At the time, it didn't seem like a big thing, but later became a big thing. The phenomenon of, forgotten Einsteins, I think, is very, very common. A lot of the early progenitors are not remembered. We happen to associate a name with something. We call it Humphrey Davy's safety lamp, but in fact, there are many people that were involved in the process. And I think the importance of all of that is if you fully accepted that is how innovation as a rule works, you'd probably organize your innovation process a little differently, because it's not the planned, solitary, deductive, foreseeable activity that it's sometimes portrayed to be.
Okay, so what, now that it's in use and it's pervasive, how has it affected your guys' use of it, or is there a follow-on study of it? Are there nuances to it now that are making it more effective? Like, I guess all these companies are collecting internal data on what the likes are, what they aren't.
Right.
I don't know, is there any interesting data, like a user behavior surrounding it?
Well, absolutely. So, I mean, the other sort of characteristic we see in the like button is, there's convergence and divergence. The process of invention and reinvention and adaptation is never done. So we had progenitors of the like button. We had the like button. We had the multifunctional like button. We had the disruption of the advertising industry. We had the front end code, the browser code. It didn't trigger the page refresh. But then, of course, we had the massive data and the associated with the back end code, which is the intelligence of social media companies. That we had new metrics of value and engagement, used the like button, but also other metrics. And more recently, we've had the rise of the influencer industry, which is this, essentially the world of TikTok, where teenage lip syncing or dance stars, attracts the sponsorship of company for the likes that they can attract in their own sort of mini media companies. Essentially, anyone could be a media company nowadays. And where does it go next? That's the final chapter. We speculate about what happens next. And we actually, in line with our philosophy that innovation is a very serendipitous process, it's very hard to predict. We present some alternative views as a future. And one of them, which some of the actual inventors of the like button sort of supported, was the idea that, as AI hits the scene, what are some of the most valuable and underutilized data sets on Earth? It's all of that data about, what do humans like? There's a tremendous amount of intelligence there to be gleaned. But there are some alternative views too. Of course, there's every benefit usually comes with a side effect, which is also not anticipated. So in another future, we begin to restrict the use of these social media tools and these liking mechanisms, because it's been proven that they negatively impact the mental health, especially of teenage girls. And some countries have taken action on that. Australia has, banned the use of social media by children below a certain age. In another scenario, we're in a virtual world where we don't need to signal with a symbol, with the thumbs up symbol that we like something. Maybe there could be automatic detection of involuntary facial muscle movements and an automatic expression of those movements in a high fidelity virtual world. So I think it's still, it's still evolving. Essentially, what we're talking about here generically is the feedback loop in the digital world. Whatever we do digitally is 10 times more useful if we get instantaneous and rich feedback. And the question is, how will we receive that feedback in the future? And those are the scenarios we explore in the final chapter.
Well, all right. Are they sort of girls, affecting them negatively? I mean, it's for everybody. I've just heard anecdotally from my kids or other people, oh, only 3 people liked my post and they're sad.
Right.
Or so-and-so didn't like my post. And I'm like, oh my God, seriously. But people are really affected by it and they feel bad, and especially negative comments or dislikes can really upset somebody. It seems,
Absolutely. And so the jury is still out on exactly how these negative side effects work. And there are various side effects associated with social media. There are privacy issues. There's, we have the case of Cambridge Analytica and the manipulation of democratic mechanisms. And we have teenage mental health issues. We have online addiction issues. We have misinformation issues, manipulation issues. And, we're still trying to figure out the science of all of that. But it's pretty clear that the benefits that we have had from social media come with a cost. And it raises the interesting question about how you could regulate for such a thing if you couldn't even predict the benefits at the time of invention, let alone the negative side effects. And so we have a chapter actually on what does this tell us about how you can regulate technology. And I think the answer is that regulatory mechanisms need to be adaptive. There's always a stage where you have this thing called regulatory lag, where you're still learning about the negative side effects of something. The science isn't firm. The regulators themselves are not educated. You may have to do something if the side effects are great, but it should probably be provisional because you will learn more and probably change your mind. So, I think regulation becomes an adaptive affair, not a one and done affair. The reason why we have, I think, such an enormous impact of this tiny thing, both positive and negative, coming back to that aspect of your question, though, is that it actually taps into some absolutely central aspects of our brain science. So in your brain, there's something called the nucleus accumbens, which essentially is the reward center where your brain gives itself a dopamine reward for sociality, sex, cocaine, and internet likes. It's all the same center. And of course, there's a dopamine high, but there's also a dopamine low, which is all of the negative sentiment associated with, our teenage daughters not having their posts liked enough or not being as relatively popular as their friends. This is a very formative age for kids, and there are consequences because this mechanism in the brain is absolutely central to one of the key features of mankind, which is our sociality. Essentially, this reward center rewards, pleasurable and evolutionarily useful activities. So you might ask, well, is this exactly the same thing as offline liking, real world liking? Yeah, it's exactly the same brain chemistry, but the difference is that in real life, I could only meet, maybe 10 people called Rich in one day if I wanted to. Online, I can have a massively higher frequency with a massively lower friction. So I can sort of essentially overwhelm my neural circuits, which is why you get these side effects.
well, I mean, you can meet people online that have literally your exact name if it's not too unusual,
Yeah, and you can sit there for an evening and do it to hundreds of
You have a Martin Reeves meetup or club, be weird.
Absolutely.
So what's any new technologies that, I don't know, will augment this, will take it off its course, will replace it? What do you see now, that it's been around for a bunch of years? What's new or what's changing about it?
Right. Well, I think we have the narrow question of what happens to the like button. We just commented on some of that. Maybe in the virtual world, it's displayed as it is in humanity. I can tell whether you like me or not, or whether you trust me or not from your involuntary facial muscle movements. Maybe that's the virtual world scenario. There's the reuse of this data. There's training data for AI. But also there are new communication problems. I mean, what is the like button an example of more broadly? It's an example of the co-evolution of communication technology and language. Because if you look back at the history of communication, every time we had a breakthrough in communication, we usually had to innovate in the technology of communication. We also used to necessarily have to invent things linguistically. So, for example, when the printing press was invented and we could read things that were not read aloud by people, English grammar, unlike Latin grammar, was so degenerate that we couldn't tell whether something was a question or not because we didn't hear the rising tone. So we invented the punctuation of the question mark. In the Roman amphitheater, when we had so many people in the stadium that were voting on the fate of the gladiators, you couldn't shout your, kill him or save him desire in the Colosseum. So you had the thumbs up symbol as a sort of visual voting mechanism. And the like button put some sentiment back into this digital technology. So expanded the reach of communication further. We needed the like button. Now, what are the linguistic innovations that we'll need in the future as technology progresses? I think authenticity will be a key one, because if we're dealing with with avatars or people that could be people or bots, we can't tell. We need a way of judging authenticity. Is it a human, and is it the human I think it is? And so that becomes a major downside of the expanded communication potential of the new technologies, and therefore something we're going to have to innovate around. You might call them trust technologies. Who do I trust that I'm talking to?
Yeah, I wonder if consuming a piece of content, instead of just one like, you'll have many reactions to it that come through some other mechanism, so that you can, kind of pick apart the content and not just see when someone left, but, oh, they like this, they didn't like that. They like this, they didn't like that. That kind of thing.
And to some extent, we already do. We have the multifunctional like button. We have also the advertisers, the digital advertising agencies use all sorts of new ratios, for instance, engagement value, engagement frequency, homophily. They have all sorts of metrics to measure more subtle qualities that are sort of, if you like, subsets of the like button. And if in the virtual world we were able to read, and there are already some technologies that can do this, although they're not in widespread use. When we can read involuntary facial muscle movements and read 50 emotions or 100 emotions, maybe we can get very rich about that feedback mechanism. Now, of course, that offers great potential, but you can imagine that also sows the seeds of a new set of challenges. And this is very much how technology proceeds. We solve one problem, we create another problem, and then another innovation solves that problem, and so on ad infinitum.
Okay, well, very good. Where can people that want to find out more about the story, more about the studies, more about all the nuances of it, where can they learn more about this concept?
So the book called Like, The Button That Changed the World is coming out on April the 29th from Harvard Business Press. You can already pre-order it on Amazon. We have a Harvard Business Review article about an aspect of our conversation today was about how does innovation really work? So there's a whole article on that coming up, roughly similar timing in Harvard Business Review. And we'll be touring the world, speaking about all of these different things. And I'm very much looking forward to that.
Okay. Well, very good, Martin. Thank you so much for coming, and I really appreciate it. And, we'll direct listeners to go to Amazon and pre-order if they can for April 29th for your book coming out.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.